Hey guys, Sam Stein, managing editor at the Bulwark, back again here with Chuck Todd, who thankfully put on his University of Miami pullover. Got to
There you go. That's
represent.
right. And
There it is.
look, that's who's getting the lion's share of my tuition dollars right now. But starting next year, I'm an all ACC family. Starting next year, the SMU Mustangs will be competing with the University of Miami for my tuition dollars.
What division are they in now? I can't keep track of.
They're in the ACC as well. Okay, basically, gotcha. They're the ones that said, we don't need any money. We're Texas, baby. We're Dallas. Well, you don't worry about paying us. You just let us in your club and we'll be just fine.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. Well, we're not going to be talking, maybe down the road, we'll talk about college sports because I think that's worthwhile too. But today we're going to be talking about the Associated Press and this situation that we find ourselves in where the premier wire service in the country is being cast out by the White House and how we move about this as fellow journalists. Before we get into that, as always, subscribe to the feed. We appreciate it. Broke 1 million. Thank you very much. We got a pizza party as noted. All right, Chuck, let's start broad picture. What's your sense of what's happening here?
Well, I feel like this is the Trump White House and Donald Trump testing the electric fence, right? I've always thought the best metaphor to Donald Trump is that first Jurassic Park where they all go, oh my God, they don't ever test the fence in the same place, right? You know, the dinosaurs have a brain. The velociraptors know what they're doing.
Right.
So this is no doubt this is testing the fence, right? And this is what makes, I think it's an interesting challenge, if you will, that the press corps is having at this moment of collective weakness. Let's not pretend it's not, right? This is a moment of collective weakness. Right now is sort of at least the press corps' ability to perhaps persuade the public of its righteousness, if you will.
Right.
And, you know, I had this conversation with Chris Cillizza a few days ago where we were debating, is this a mountain? Is this a molehill? Right. And you can sit here and say, oh, geez, I spent a lot of time in Pensacola, which is on the Gulf Coast. You know what? Nobody in Pensacola calls the Gulf anything after. They don't say anything after the word Gulf.
It's the Gulf.
Hey, it's the Gulf. Okay?
The Gulf.
Nobody. I have lived in and out of Florida my whole life. Never does anybody say Gulf of Mexico side, Atlantic Ocean side. It is.
I guess
Gulf
we should
side,
pause
Atlantic
for a second because for the uninitiated, the issue here is that the Associated Press has decided that it is going to continue to refer to the Gulf as the Gulf of Mexico, despite a Trump executive order rebranding it as the Gulf of America. Since then, Trump and the White House have said you can't come into the pool, which is essentially a group of journalists that that are tasked with covering the president as he moves around day in, day out. And then they've escalated, so you can't come on Air Force One. They can't come into the Oval Office. And that's where we stand. So, yes, back to Pensacola. They call it the Gulf.
So the point is, I don't know anybody in America that refers to the Gulf outside of just one word, the Gulf. So I understand if the average person who isn't sort of, a longtime journalist or sitting there going, is this a hill worth dying on? Right. And, I've vacillated on this and I've come down on the side of it is because the next hill is going to be bigger. Right. This is not going to be the one-time test. This is the first of many. And this is about essentially, trying to bring, essentially the language of journalism, when NBC Standards makes decisions, they look to the AP style guide first. They don't always follow AP style guide. I have my own issues with AP style guides at times when it comes to, for instance, how you refer to abortion rights supporters and anti-abortion rights supporters. I came from the hotline and we decided we should refer to each side by their preferred moniker. So we would go with pro-choice and pro-life. I was so programmed to do it that I often said that on the air. I'd get lectured by Standards at NBC and I'd continue to say it on the air because I understood, there were some on the pro-life side, anti-abortion rights side, who would argue, the description is automatically negative. You're portraying us in a negative light, right? It's when the word anti is. But
the issue here is
correct.
It's not. They're taking the choice away from the outlet and giving.
No, there's no doubt, and that's. But my point is that AP it is more than just the leading wire service, arguably in the world. Reuters might have Reuters is the other sort of
they would make a claim to the international one, but yeah, go ahead.
No doubt. But those are the two.
Yeah.
And so this is about Trump wanting to control language police too a little bit, or certainly the Trump communications shop on that front. So this is a test of wills. I've been disappointed in the inability of the rest of the White House press corps to sort of stand up to this moment. I understand that everybody has a boss. It's my understanding that there are lots of journalists in that room that would like to be taking more of a stand than their bosses want them to, which I think is this is a reminder. We've already seen all the capitulations of the various corporate entities that own news organizations that we've been watching. And it's extending to this sort of lack of a showdown. And here's the irony, covering the president is very expensive. Right. Being in the pool, the government doesn't pay for the press corps to be in the pool. The Associated Press pays for that. Right. And if you take that away, good luck finding other news organizations that are going to be willing to spend that kind of money, even their preferred news, unless I guess, maybe some wealthy person will just sort of underwrite the Daily Caller or whatever, right? That to whatever manufactured replacement or the Daily Wire or whatever it is.
Sure.
But it's extraordinarily expensive. And I'll tell you what Donald Trump would miss if there was no longer a press pool that was traveling with him.
All the coverage he gets every day.
He likes all the coverage. And I don't know why the rest of the press corps is.
Before we get into reaction and remedies, let's just talk a little bit about. Let's play with this hypothetical to just sort of distinguish between whether it's a mountain or a molehill. Let's say the Associated Press tomorrow said, "You know what? We will call it the Gulf of America. It's not worth it. Let's just do it." Mm-hmm. I'm just playing devil's advocate with you because I actually agree with you. They shouldn't do it. I actually think this is actually a very big deal. But let's say they do it. What's the next? You say it's a slippery slope. What's the next?
Well, by the way, there was another way they could have done this, and I'm curious to see if the White House would have reacted the same way, which is saying, look, our formal recognition, the global recognition of this body of water is Gulf of Mexico.
Sure.
And, we will, in American coverage, we will note it is also referred to as,
and some people have done that, right? Like I think Google has done that where if you Google it in America, it's Gulf of America, but if you're outside, it's Gulf of Mexico still.
And I wonder if they had done that first, right? What the reaction, what the White House would have done.
Right. Do
they do anything? Right. I don't know. It's obviously that's that. So you throw a hypothetical out there. I wanted to throw that back, which is, what if they had just come up with some sort of
middle ground?
If there was one. And by the way, there are plenty of things that are called one thing by one country and called something else by another country. Sure. I mean, by the way, there are country names that change. Myanmar, Burma. Some countries want to still refer to it as Burma. It'll always be Burma to me if you watch a lot of Seinfeld. But to play your hypothetical there, I think it's a slippery slope because it sort of dictates what the press can and can't say, right? It is sort of the entire premise of the First Amendment. And I don't, while the president doesn't have to take questions from AP ever again,
right?
I don't know if it, I don't know if in a democracy it has the authority of just barring them from doing something that isn't their decision of who's in the protective pool. That's a White House Press Association decision.
Now, I should note that the Associated Press has actually, so Trump issued another executive order where he took the name of Mount Denali in Alaska and changed it to Mount McKinley. The Associated Press did accommodate that. They refer to it as Mount McKinley now because it is, and their rationale was this is within the American boundaries. It's not an international body. And therefore, we believe that it's within the.
By the way, it's no different than an airport name, right? I remember a long time.
Reagan.
Look, I lived here before Reagan it was known as Reagan, and there were a whole bunch of air traffic controllers, in particular, who hated Reagan because he was infamously fired a bunch of them early on in his tenure, who refused to call it Reagan, right, for like the longest time, and then there would be these fights about whether to call it Reagan. At the end of the day, hey, that's the official name of the airport, right? Like this is now he has the ability to officially rename that mountain. So the body of water, though, is not something that we've ever really dealt with like this before.
It's uncharted territory.
It really is. And it's so typical of Trump, right? To take something ridiculous like this.
Right.
And try to turn it into this culture war. Right.
Yeah.
And that's what it is, which is why it's sort of like, do you fight on his terms? Well, on this case, if it's a basic principle, yes.
You do. Okay, so unpack a little bit, because you talked about it, but unpack how the pool works. I don't think people really recognize it, and how it operates, and what kind of structure it has, who controls it, and all the access points in the White House.
Well, look, there's been this protective pool. It was created sometime in the 80s, because there was a time, for instance, and it was basically like anything. This was about cutting costs, and it was about the lack of space, right? You had sort of two competing issues, as you had more news organizations wanting to be in every major event at the White House. Andrea Mitchell can tell you stories of when there were competing. Literally, you'd have 3 cameras in every. Can you imagine 3 camera crews in every pool spray? Well, that's what's called a pool spray now, but because it's only pool. But before there was a pool, 3 cameras would be in there. 3 radio networks. You might have had 6 newspaper reporters. It started to get a bit absurd. Then it became a safety issue. And there was also, there was certainly financial, right? That was a big driver for the media side of things when the 3 major networks, then it expanded to CNN, then it expanded to Fox, so now every 5 days there's the 5 TV networks, and in this case it's ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox rotate who's in the TV seat. There used to be a radio seat. I assume there is no radio seat anymore. I haven't been a White House correspondent in 10 years, but I don't know if there's.
I haven't been there in a while. I'll double check that one.
Yeah. When I left, I think it was a constant rotation, really, between NPR and Bloomberg Radio. I want to say
ABC News Radio had
ABC News Radio had it for a while. Yeah. I don't know if that exists anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, in its current form. So, but there would be a rotation in a radio seat. There was a print rotation. You were a member of that when you were at HuffPo back in the day. And that was more of and there were 2 different print pool rotations, traveling print,
right,
for the news organizations that were willing to pay the high cost of being a part of the pool.
And it's high cost. Yeah, it's very expensive. Yeah.
Very expensive. Versus the in-town pool, which you didn't really have to pay for, if I'm not mistaken.
You did not. You went around. The president might go to some event locally, and you were in that pool, but mostly you were hanging around the White House covering pooled events at the White House.
And to be in the pool, if you're not on White House grounds, means you're in the motorcade, for what it's worth. You've got Secret Service protection. You're in the motorcade. You're just ahead of the ambulance, I believe, right? Mm-hmm. If you're keeping track of it. And, so on Air Force One, there is a wire. I believe there were 2 wire seats.
I think that's right.
Back in the day. Maybe there's down to 1, but there used to be 2 wire seats, and they were always just, AP always had one, and I think Bloomberg would pay to have the other one. The rotation of the TV side, a rotation of radio, rotation of print. And then you might have one other guest, right? Somebody that might be traveling with the pool at the president's press office discretion or something like that. But it is a rotation. It is run by the White House Press Association in consultation with the press office.
Right.
Right. When they put out pool reports, it's the White House press office that puts out the print pool report. And it is, which is, I've always thought is weird, because we in the TV pool directly fed our information to our colleagues in the TV pool, while you in print sent yours to the White House press office for potential edits.
Well, this actually happened once where they held a pool report of mine because they didn't like some inclusion I had, and I flipped. I was like, you can't edit.
It's not your decision.
It's not your decision. That's my copy. So access, long short of it, is that access is important. you're there to document every single, ideally, not every single, but most movements of the president. And the AP has been constant presence there. And Trump has decided that's no longer going to be the case. And let's play the footage of Trump most recently explaining or talking about the AP and why he is doing this.
The Associated Press just refuses to go with what the law is and what is taking place. It's called the Gulf of America now. It's not called the Gulf of Mexico any longer. I have the right to do it, just like we have the right to do Mount McKinley, and nobody's even challenging that. But only essentially, it's primarily the Associated Press, and I don't know what they're doing, but I just say that we're going to keep them out until such time as they agree that it's the Gulf of America. We're very proud of this country, and we want it to be the Gulf of America.
Now we get to the point where, okay, they've clearly made this stand. He's cutting them out from the pool, and he's cutting them out from the oval. And now we get to what you were talking about, which is what is recourse here. And I'm reminded of something actually quite similar that happened when you and I were both at the White House in 2009. The backstory is the Obama White House was furious with Fox News. If I remember correctly, it was mostly with Glenn Beck.
At the time, it was a Glenn Beck issue.
His conspiratorial chalkboard musings. Yeah. And they refused to let Fox News in the pool again. And they were a specific event was I think it had to do with
it was a Treasury event.
A
round robin. It was probably a round robin interview.
It was about the auto bailout because it involved Feinberg, and they just said Fox not going to cover it. And what happened next was you guys, the TV people,
the TV network said no. Right, we said no. Well, look, it is an equal. There's a chair of the pool every. I believe it changes quarterly, not monthly. But somebody may fact check me on that. Maybe it's monthly now, but it would be quarterly, and it would basically be a rotation of the DC bureau chiefs, and they dealt so that there would be a single point of contact between the White House communications shop, the White House press secretary, and a executive that sort of oversaw the pool for that quarter, whatever it was. I cannot remember who was chairing at that moment, but it doesn't matter. All five, it's very expensive to do the TV pool because you're paying for three people all the time, right? The journalist, the audio, and the shooter, the photographer, camera guy, and so it's very expensive and it's shared cost. Okay, everybody pays the same amount of money, so we viewed it, frankly, as just a violation of our contract, essentially, with each other, right? Of our cooperative, however you wanted to describe it. It is, we've agreed to do this, and you can't, if you're going to leave them out, then we're all out. You can give it an exclusive, and then they, look, White Houses have played games. Hey, this is a broadcast only versus cable. You would have that, with quote round robins and what would be pooled and what wouldn't be pooled. We have things like that. But so the rest of the network stood up because, it was one of those moments where, hey, this time it's something that's harming Fox. Next time it could. And that was exactly the rationale. It was just sort of like, this is a slippery slope. And I've always argued this has been a bipartisan effort by White Houses to pressure essentially coverage on the pool, pressure all the time, right? There's always been more. Every White House tries to create more restrictions of press access than the previous White House. And it hasn't mattered whether it was a Democratic White House replacing a Republican White House or vice versa. This has been a universal where every communication shop comes in thinking, we're going to tame this press corps and we're going to push back. You're not going to have this much access. We're going to cut off access here or cut off access there. And we always fought it, and I always fought access pressure from the Obama White House because I viewed it as slippery slope.
Yeah, of course.
The minute you let one White House do something, the next one would use it as precedent to prevent it from happening in the next White House.
Did you guys, now refresh my memory, did you guys say we will not cover the next
We didn't say
event?
I can't remember what our threat was, but we're just like, the pool goes away. Like we're not going to participate in this event. Right. It's funny. I was looking back. They capitulated.
Yeah, they capitulate, but not at first. And it was kind of interesting because I went back, I looked at it, and it's their reasoning was almost remarkably similar to what Trump is doing now, which was, it's not a real news organization. Like we can't abide by commentary. We have to have standards here for what actually is news, and we don't need to. We don't need to be dictated to essentially what those standards are. Now they did capitulate, and I'm not trying to make a false equivalency because I do think Fox News is fundamentally.
Well, I would also argue that
Press.
The irony is that, and this is just deep irony, is that Fox News, when it was run by Roger Ailes, allowed journalists to be journalists at Fox. Right. The current version of Fox News, I think Jennifer Griffin tries to practice journalism. I think Chad Pergram. I think there's still journalists I always say, Fox is not a journalistic organization. There are people that practice journalism that happen to work at Fox, right? But it is not a journalistic enterprise at all. Ironically, Roger Ailes knew he couldn't have credibility at night if he didn't have real journalism. I mean, Brit Hume, at the end of the day, is a journalist first, and he always and he fought really hard. And you, by the way, you see glimmers of it, right? Which is why they limit Brit. I feel like Brit Hume's airtime keeps shrinking all the time over there because he will stubbornly speak truth to power at inconvenient times for the Fox audience. But the point was, Roger knew he had to have credible journalists in the daytime in order for the folks at night to get credibility. This is not how Fox is run now. It is just run as an amplification message machine. It is not. There are, like I said, there are still a few legacy people over there that practice journalism as best they can under the circumstances with which they have to work. Right. But it is a totally different animal today than it was. Put it this way, I thought the way that Obama White House spoke about Fox journalists, that is not my experience with Wendell Goler. That was not my experience with Major Garrett. That was not my experience with Mike Emanuel.
Was Major the White House correspondent at the time, or was it Ed? I want to say it was Major. I think it was Major.
But
Major, total
Wendell Goler, Mike Emanuel. These are pros. These were all pros. Mike Emanuel still a pro, and I hesitate to sit here and trash the organization because a guy like Mike Emanuel's, working his tail off. But that's just, look, that's what it is now. Right.
And I think the fact that they had those people on staff made it a lot harder for the Obama people to say, we're pushing you out. Now, so you guys eventually, in a matter of days, they capitulate. Fox gets back in the pool in 2009. Flash forward to now. We're not seeing anything like that. We've seen no one in the press pool, as far as I know, say, hey, if they're not allowed in, we're not going to cover you guys. Like, that's absurd. Why are we not getting the same collective action?
I think there's a few reasons. One is you have individual journalists that would like to do things, but their bosses have cautioned them not to. There are major news organizations that don't want to be in this. Everybody's trying to avoid a fight with Trump, right? It's sort of, this is not the hill to die on mindset, right? And you see it all over the place. And I think this is what's happening more than anything else. And then the other concern, and I've had this conversation with a few, what I would call leaders in that space, is, if you lead, will anybody follow?
Right.
Like a fear that
action, right? That is the issue, right?
It is sort of like, and I think we know they have more power collectively than they do individually, but they're afraid to find out, what if everybody is so scared that you don't have the collective action, right? And that's what Trump's trying to prove, right? He's trying to divide and conquer on this front. Certainly, this Trump communication shop. Trump 1.0 still wanted to have, Kellyanne Conway sort of more managing communications. She needed reasonable relationships with mainstream media. This version, this guy Chung, who's just
Stephen Chung.
He's Baghdad Bob, right? And sometimes in how he responds to everything, you're like, you literally, you'll be like, the Associated Press declared today that the sun set in the West, and it's like, how dare they say that? The sun set in the Trump. is what Stephen Chung would probably say, right? Like it's comical, right? I find his quotes comical. They're fun to read at times,
right?
But they're not remotely close to the truth and accuracy. And so they don't care about this relationship with the press, right?
No,
in fact,
they don't need the press. They need the press as a boogeyman. They need the press as a punching bag.
This is the most fascinating rationale I've heard from a few journalists that say this isn't the fight to have is this. They want to fight. Don't give them a fight.
Right.
Right. Rope-a-dope. Right. Let them punch themselves out. Rope-a-dope. Don't
do you not buy that?
On some things I do. Right. I agree that they want the fight, but I worry about precedent. Right. The next White House. What does the next White House do? And again, all I have is the professional history of my time being at the White House, observing it before I got there and watching it after. Precedents matter a great deal. They're used all the time to justify the next action.
Let me pepper you.
This is why that White House press corps, they are harming the press corps for President Vance and President Westmore and President, Barron, Trump, etc.
Assuming we have future presidents, yes.
Or emperors or whatever we call them, right? What happened when the Roman Republic became the Roman Empire, right? We changed the title.
Yeah, you changed the title. All right, let me pepper you with a few here. One is a lot. There's this whole idea of, well, one thing they could do, the press corps could do, is just stop covering Trump. Don't send anyone there. And I don't know. I honestly don't know. I can see both sides.
You got to cut. Look, you owe to your readers.
Yeah,
you owe to your readers. You have to cover what's happening. You have a job to do. This whole look. I think one of the biggest mistakes that were made, and I was on the minority in this fight post January 6th. The decision to deplatform Trump is the single greatest mistake mainstream media did, because it allowed Trump to create an alternative ecosystem that is now dangerous to the world. This alternative ecosystem is now essentially going to kill people in Ukraine.
Well, and also, Chuck, it let people forget what Trump was on January 6th.
100%, right? The decision to deplatform him, he started his own thing. I mean, just literally, there is no good that came from this. And I never understood the rationale. No, we will not put anybody that didn't certify the election on mainstream media ever again. And I'm sitting here going, hey guys, the voters platformed these people. This isn't about whether, you can have a debate about whether Jeff Zucker should have given Donald Trump a TV show in The Apprentice. You want to have that debate? Go ahead and have that debate. But you know who decided that Donald Trump should be president of the United States? The voters.
Right.
And the Republican voters decided they should be the nominee. And you can have an argument about, okay, he didn't win the popular vote in 2016, but he won the Electoral College. He was the president of the United States. The voters platformed him, pure and simple. So deplatforming him was a huge mistake. And I think it's led to all of this current situation. I really, if I could correct one thing, it would have been that.
So you're not, I'm with you. I don't buy the idea that, okay, the proper reaction to what he's doing to the AP is just don't give him any coverage whatsoever. You can't do that. You just can't.
No, but I'll say this. This is also a question about access journalism, right? And I always say this, there's all types of journalism and we need all types of it. You can't just, if you're only an access journalist, you're a stenographer. But guess what? You need a stenographer. Okay. With the president of the United States, right? You need to find out what is happening when it comes to the questions.
I want the transcript. Yeah,
correct. When it comes to a question, the questions we as journalists are having to answer, right? The who, what, where, when. You need to know the what, right? What happened, and that's just a basic thing. But here's something that I do think is unique with Trump, which is getting information from the Trump administration is not necessarily helpful to your viewers or readers, right? Because it's usually not the truth. There are glimmers of truth. There are crumbs of truth, but it isn't the full truth. You're never getting the full story from the Trump White House, right? We know this. It takes sort of 3 or 4 different versions. You put them all together.
And even then.
And it is, but it is one of those things that you realize that. So I actually don't think, I think if you want to mislead yourself as a journalist, only cover Trump through the White House press briefing. right? Like that's like,
Well, that's what I tell people. I mean, everyone who talks to me about covering the White House, what I say to them is that it's both the most prestigious and important job in the world and the most miserable job, because you are literally on one side of a wall and they're on the other side of the wall. Right. And they present to you a reality that they want to present, and your job is to find out what actually is happening on the other side of the wall.
Well, I don't know about you, but every story I broke at the White House, my sources were on the Hill.
Yeah.
Well, that's 90% of the time. Like if you want to cover the White House, you do it from Capitol Hill.
And that's why when I was running White House coverage at Politico, I was insistent that we have a Hill-based White House correspondent, because that was just the best way to get. All right, always. Last question then is the other thing, and I think I know where it's sort of what we've talked about, but the Trump people are like, well, look, we're not. The AP can come to the briefings. They can come to the White House proper. We're not restricting access. What we're telling them is they can't have the privilege of going into the Oval, of riding on Air Force One.
Great. Pull the photographers. I'll tell you this: if the White House photogs said they would not cover any pool events until AP's was restored, that might have impact, because guess who really wants pictures of himself? Donald Trump, and it isn't. And many news organizations, we used to have a rule, and unfortunately, this was one that we let the Obama White House change the rules on this. And I always regretted it. And I fought it internally, which was to accept White House photographs, taken photographs as
the White House photographer takes the photograph and then presents
of a news event and then presents it. And we didn't have a independent journalistic, photographer there. It again, slippery slopes. I think what's the most famous example, the re-oath, right, where they didn't elect
with Justice Roberts,
Justice Roberts, because he blew the oath.
Quaint problems, but yes, I remember that one.
Yeah.
All right, so in the end, this is a collective action issue, and ultimately journalists, and I've lived it, like, you are constantly figuring out, do I work to advance my publication's interests, or do I work to advance the interests of the institution of journalism? And
a lot of it just depends on what kind of support you have from your bosses.
Right.
And, do you have is your boss a journalist, or is your boss a news executive? And there's a difference these days. And, the news executives that were former journalists usually are a little tougher minded on this and are ready to take the heat. But as we see, look at the Washington Post decision to first take an advertisement and then say no to an advertisement. This is having to do and this again, it's actually it's sort of a symbolic thing, because who the hell gets the hard copy delivered newspaper anymore? But the Washington Post was apparently selling a wraparound advertisement that was going to be pretty anti-Elon Musk, I take it.
Yeah,
I think
it's critical of Doge and Musk,
It was going to be critical of Doge, which is very much federal workers, right? If anybody's going to read a hard copy of the Washington Post, it's going to be federal workers here in the DMV, and Donald Trump, right? Who still reads a hard copy of the newspaper? Donald J. Trump. Well,
the New York Post, not the Washington Post, but yeah.
True, but at least it's on his desk, right? to get his Sharpie.
Assuming they haven't canceled all the subscriptions through Doge, but yes.
Right. So, I'm sure somebody looking out for the Jeff Bezos politics at the Post said, oh, this isn't worth the headache that it's going to give. And again, I understand the rationale of Bob Iger to settle, the rationale of Sherry Redstone to settle, the rationale of these of Jeff Bezos, because he's got other interests, or Jeff Bezos to sort of, I don't know what you call the talent fee for Melania Trump, but that is
the $40 million.
That's pretty impressive. Probably the greatest modeling contract she ever got. Wow, right? But again, I get the rationale that they're all thinking, right? They're just thinking about their business interests. And here's the slippery slope, Sam, I think this is, when people say, what's happening to the American democracy? And I'm like, step one, when you start to see a democracy erode, the first thing that happens is it becomes a kleptocracy, becomes a pay for play. And I think all of these press decisions that we're watching are a form of pay for play, right?
So you think you believe that the Post, maybe CBS, people who have people higher up who have financial incentives to play nice
Right.
are not going to be incentivized, conversely, to say, hey, we're going to take a moral stand with the Associated Press because they know it will piss off the Trump folks. And
it's not, they don't, and it's not worth the price for them. Right. I joke when you think about the history of NBC.
But then at what point does it become worth the price, or is the price just too much to pay? Yeah.
I don't know. And, you know, it's too bad. There's a great shareholder letter that a friend of mine got a hold of that William Paley one time sent to shareholders at CBS, basically saying, hey, I hate Edward R. Murrow too. I don't like him too. They hated him. Okay. This isn't new, by the way. Shareholders and wealthy people not liking some journalists on the airwaves. Okay. Edward R. Murrow, big business, hated him, all this stuff. And Paley basically said, you know, look, he only helps your bottom line in the long run because the more credibility our news has, the more credit. Paley, to Paley's credit, he was making the case for having essentially somebody against their business interests,
right,
or potentially against their business interests, channeling some part of the American public's anger, or however you want to describe it. And there aren't any William Paleys right now running any major media corporations. They're just not.
And then the other thing, though, is and it's obvious why this is happening, but Fox was the beneficiary of collective action back in 2009, as we discussed.
Right.
And obviously it's a different entity now. I'm not going to say I'm disappointed that they're not standing up for the AP, because I never expect them to stand up for the AP. But I'm wondering if you're disappointed, having stood up for Fox yourself.
I've given up on. I don't want to name call, but I've given up. I've handed my credibility to a handful of journalists over there who've never reciprocated. When times were tough for them, I went out of my way to defend a couple of them. Right. When times were tough, or an unfair criticism or character assassination that was taking place, and these people don't stand. They're just, certainly we've seen the evolution of one of their larger news personalities go from trying really hard to follow in Brit Hume's footsteps and suddenly looks more like Sean Hannity every day.
Right.
And it's a shame, because because he really cared about that reputation. And I think really actually cared about being a journalist first and wanting to sort of walk that line, understood what his audience was. And instead now just wants to have tea time with the president. I hope he enjoys it.
Chuck, thank you so much. Thank you so much, man. Appreciate it. We're going to get you back to talk college football when the season comes, maybe.
I'd love that, man.
Chuck Todd, thank you so much, man. Appreciate it. We'll have you back.
Sam.
Take care.
Thank you, brother.